Real Estate Pro Talk with your host, Greg Ernie, connecting people, community and property.
Well, hello and welcome. Greg Ernie here. Welcome to another episode of Real Estate Pro Talk. Today we're going to be focusing on probably a section of the real estate industry that I guess is often overlooked, and that is the commercial and industrial real estate market. Fair to say last year with COVID, the commercial side, the property side in that commercial aspect really was strongly affected, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome our C&I manager, Russell Bartlett. Welcome, Russell.
Thanks for having me on, Greg.
Yeah, great to have you in. And look, before we get in, can you just share with the viewers how many years you've obviously been part of our team and as far as real estate and running our commercial and industrial department?
Yeah, sure. Before I started here, I was working for the old State Electricity Commission, which some of the older people who might watch this might remember them before it became privatised. I was at a wedding and I was talking to Dave Mavro, who was a director of the Mount Evelyn office at the time, I think. And we were talking about work, and he said, have you ever thought about real estate? And I said, no, not really. He goes, you'd make a good rental manager. And I said, I was 23 or 24. I said, what's a rental manager do? So he told me, and I thought, that sounds all right. I was a little bit bored with what I was doing, so he said, I'll speak to Jeff and I'll get him to give you a ring. So those were the days pre-mobile phone. I still remember I was home from work. It was about 7 o'clock at night. The phone rings and Mum answers the phone. She goes, there's a Jeff Ernie on the phone. And I went, oh my God, he's actually rung me. So I answered the phone and he said, you were talking to Dave, blah, blah, blah. Would you like to come in for a chat? I said, yeah, I'd like that. And he goes, can you come in tomorrow? Which is typical Jeff, get things done tomorrow. And of course, being a public servant, I just rang up the next morning and chucked a sickie. And I shouldn't admit that, but it's 30 odd years ago.
Yeah, you'll get away with it.
Yeah, get away with it. Yeah. And came in for an interview and he said, we'll get back to you. And we had a chat and he rang me the next day or the next night and said, if you'd like to come in for a job, we'd like to give you one. And so that was in 1988. 1988.
So
I've been here 33 years in August.
33 years, started in the residential rental department.
In the resi rentals, as we used to say.
That's right. And when did you move across to heading up our C&I division?
Yeah, it was kind of an organic move, really, because Jeff was doing commercial then when I started. I looked after residential rentals and I looked after the owners' corporation managements that we had. At the time we had about 30.
Yep.
10 commercial owners corps and 20 odd residential, and would take the overflow of Jeff's work from commercial as while I was doing the residentials and everything else. And so after about, it was probably 8 or 9 years, I think maybe 10, we sold off the body corporate register.
Yep.
And the reason why we did that, just to bore people with it, is that pre-database, body corporates were a way of having a database. So our sales team would be able to talk to the people within the body corporate that we managed, because we were mailing them invoices and we were, I was out there looking at the gardening, and so it was a way of staying in touch with our residential data. That was the first database.
Yes.
So once we started databasing, we didn't really need body corporates, and they did take up a lot of time, and it was kind of just a sideline for us, so we sold them off, kept the commercials, and I probably became a full-time commercial manager for the last 23 years or so.
So 23 years running our C&I division. Obviously, we look after a lot of shops, factories, locally, and you well and truly have your finger on the pulse. And I want to probably the first question. I've got a number of questions, but probably if I can ask, COVID last year, how did that affect that department for yourselves?
I think probably, as you said in the intro, COVID probably had the greatest impact within the economy on commercial tenants, which was obvious. It was on the news.
Yep.
So it was the federal government introduced a formula for owners to use to recalculate tenants' rent because they had to shut down.
Yep.
So that basically stopped cash flow. Tenants' cash flow stopped, landlords' cash flow stopped, and in all honesty, our cash flow stopped because managing agents collect rent, we take management fees. You're not collecting rent, we weren't collecting management fees. So there was a domino effect across the board.
So you and Julie that working that look after that, Julie Lancaster, that run that department. And I saw last year the personal effects and just how tough it was on both of you to manage that. What was let's talk about the landlords. How did the landlords cope? Or both. You're landlord, tenant. You saw all sides.
Absolutely. There was three. We're in the middle of two very emotional situations.
Absolutely.
You know, a lot of tenant businesses were struggling. They didn't know what would happen.
Yep.
Landlords who relied on that income didn't know what was going to happen.
Yep.
There were many types of businesses that if they didn't trade, they didn't have to pay any rent.
Yeah.
And I suppose fair enough, but at the same time, owners were paying mortgages. Yes, they could get them deferred. That wasn't the perfect answer to everything. But other people who lived off that income, they weren't getting the income.
Yeah.
So Julie and I were effectively psychologists in the middle of a very emotional situation.
Yeah.
And it was very. I have to say, it was very stressful.
Oh, and I know at one point there, both Jeff and I could see just how taxing it was on you guys for just the conversations. I remember chatting to you, one day, and it was probably the real, I guess I'm in more the sales side, as you know, residential, so I didn't have as much, see as much impact on that as how it was affecting people. But, I said, how are you going? And you said, well, I'll give you an example. There's an owner at the moment that we manage a property for, and I can't remember what sort of business it was, but they managed a property. The tenant wasn't paying any rent because they weren't able to operate. The landlord needed obviously the rent to come in. She deferred the mortgage for 6 months, and I think the conversation was, Russell, if the rent isn't paid from the start of October or the end of October, whenever it was, I need you to move the tenant out. Which sounds like, okay, we'll move the tenant out and we'll move a new tenant in, but the reality was you wouldn't be able to find a new tenant either. So, here's the poor tenant that's got business that they can't operate. They're not getting any income. Then you got the landlord that's not getting any income, and perhaps who knows what their work environment was like as well. It really was I
think a lot of stress too came from no one knew the future.
Correct. Yep.
So it's panning at the moment. It's panning out okay.
So that was my next question. Fast forward to where we are. So this time last year, it was like the world was going to implode. Now here we are, end of April, start of May, mid-May. Where are we now?
Well, there's actually quite an underlying confidence at the moment, which is good. There's a good feeling out there at the minute.
Yep.
There's a number of businesses that did trade very well through COVID. Obviously, when we managed some liquor stores, they went very well. Yeah. It's the personal services that got hit particularly. There was dance studios, beauty therapists, massage therapists, any of that close contact business.
Yes.
They couldn't trade. They were the first to shut. They were the last to open.
Yep. And
they were the last to open with any number of people that could be in something.
Yep.
And just on that note, there's a good example is that under the formula that the government provided, owners had to waive some of the rent that the tenant should have paid, and then the tenant will have to pay back some of the rent that they didn't pay at the time. But we still have to face the next, 1 to 2 years where, as an example, we have one tenant whose rent is about $6,000 a month. They're deferred. Yes, some of that rent was waived, but they have a deferral payment of about $1,200 a month on top of their rent.
Yeah.
So their rent is $6,000 a month plus $1,200, $7,200. So their business has to have enough momentum now to be able to pay back
what was deferred.
Yep. So there's still a little bit of an unknown there. So we're all hoping that the economy will continue in its current trajectory.
Yep.
So tenants their business has that momentum to do that.
And I think so far the majority of people that I'm speaking to overall, certainly out in the outer east, which is where we are, business is good. There seems to be a fair bit of momentum, and generally most businesses, you might know of others that perhaps finding it tough, but generally from what I'm hearing, activity is good. So hopefully that's going to
continue.
Continue.
Yeah, I think that the fact that the residential market is booming. And mind you, the residential market and the commercial market don't run on a parallel path. We've often talked about that.
Yep.
But because the residential market's doing well, there is a confidence within the community. So that's a good thing too.
So for residential rents, there was the moratorium that no tenant was able to be evicted before basically the end of March. Was there anything in place for that as well?
There
for
was.
commercial?
It's very
Yep.
similar. That ran up
Yep.
to the end of March as well.
Yep.
I'm pretty pleased to say that probably that we haven't had to take that action. There's been one or two, but there were already issues with those particular businesses prior to COVID, so it was pretty much COVID brought it to a head, and
Yep.
and owners took action on that basis. Not pleasant, but sometimes it does happen.
And did you have many tenants that just got to the point where their lease period was finished, or they're just like, you know what, it's just too hard, and they've just come and handed the keys in and walked away?
Yeah, we think we had 6,
Okay.
which is not a lot.
Yep.
But those businesses also were probably a little bit line ball prior to COVID.
Beforehand anyway.
So and it's COVID just magnified that and brought it to a head quicker.
So leasing properties, how's leasing
Yeah,
going now?
It's good at the moment.
Yep.
Inquiry is certainly improved in the last 3 months.
Yep.
The important thing is, I think, that they're looking at retail.
Yep.
So retail over COVID was where people really got hit. So we did list a few retail properties towards the end of COVID, and we've been able to move all of those on. Rents are holding.
Yep.
So if we were getting a rent for a basic lock-up shop prior to COVID and through COVID of $1,600 a month, which is like your classic Mooralbark 80 square metre shop type of thing,
Yep.
the rents are holding and they've been
Okay.
released at those.
Good.
What we are seeing though is that owners have had to provide some incentives to make sure that those businesses do get some momentum, and by incentives I mean sort of rent free during a fit out period, that type of thing.
Yeah, okay. To get them in, get them settled.
Yeah, get them settled and make sure they have some momentum.
Sales, C&I sales, how's that been?
Yeah, that's a good question too. There were owner occupiers were in the market during COVID. We made some sales during the lockdown period,
And that intrigued me on that. I remember when we were chatting, you're like, oh, we've sold. It was interesting.
It is interesting. So there were people out there who were confident and had money and felt that they were going to be right regardless of COVID or not.
Yep.
They thought that maybe they'd get it cheaper during COVID because people were under pressure, but that wasn't the case. We made some premium sales during that period, and there was some sales between $340,000 up to $900,000
Wow.
property. So
Yep.
so it was very good. And coming out of that, there's inquiry, but no one at the moment, vendor or owners of property seem to be just having a bit of a wait and see, because if they sell it, where are they going to put it?
Yeah.
You know, bank interest is
Not much.
0.
Yep.
Shares are okay, but there's still a little bit of volatility in that particular market.
Yep.
Um,
And what sort of percentage return out here
yeah,
can an owner sort of be aiming or expecting?
look, for a little, probably up to the $500,000 to $600,000 mark for a retail, they probably have to look at accepting somewhere between 4% and 5% if they were looking at buying something. As the price gets a little bit higher, as the value gets a bit higher, they could probably push maybe 6.25% return, something like that.
Yep.
But once again, not a lot on the market.
No.
So, and there are people out there at the moment, like particularly the older investors who are well cashed up,
Yep.
who've got money sitting in the bank. I met one of our clients this morning, a good long-term client. He's got money sitting there, and he said, "Look, I'm getting 0.3%.
Yeah.
I'd be happy to buy a couple of properties up to the million mark, so 2 up to the million or something like that." He'd be happy with 4%.
Yep.
So we've just got to try and find them for him.
And I always find it intriguing or interesting, the commercial side, because the value of the property is based largely on the percentage return and how it all stacks up dollar wise. So it's a little bit different. You don't get the growth as such in value as like what you do in residential, but at the same time you obviously get a better
income.
a better return or better income.
Yeah, correct. And at certain stages in people's lives, the income is the important thing rather than the capital growth.
And at the moment, your sales that you have made, are they more to, let's call it owner occupiers, so to speak, where their businesses buying to utilise themselves?
Yeah, they have
or
been.
Or are they investors coming back into the market?
Yeah, haven't sold. we've got some investors who I'm working with that I'm trying to find listings for. I've appraised a number of properties in the last month or so that would be investments. But once again, there's got to be motivation from the seller to sell those investments.
Yes.
So, and this is where, a lot of the agents that I'm talking to that, just within the industry are finding the same problem.
Yep.
So, but it's been, the owner occupiers have been there because the properties have been there.
Yes.
I think if the investments were there, the investors would be there.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yep. It's an interesting thing, and I guess probably what everyone always wants to know is, well, where do you see the market going? What's the general feeling around the C&I space?
Yeah, I tell you, it's I keep saying that's a good question because they are good questions. I think that everybody is just waiting to see probably what the rest of this year brings before we can all predict what's going to happen. Tenants have got deferred rent to be paid, and that's only really just now coming on stream. There is talk that the economy might come off a little bit, even though it's strong. So everyone's waiting to see what happens there. So I think that, at the risk of sounding like an economist, which I don't want to, I think it's going to be a little bit steady as she goes.
Sure.
I'm not going to make any predictions.
Well, like all economists, Russ, sometimes they make predictions and
they're wrong.
Sometimes they get it right and sometimes they get it wrong. So we won't hold you.
Very good. Oh, no, it's
we
safe
won't
to
hold
say
you to it.
Steady as she goes.
I guess if anyone, for many people that are watching, they may not really understand that the commercial, a lot of people probably understand the residential, but commercial is probably something a little bit different, especially if they're looking at it from an investment. You're happy to obviously always speak to anyone considering.
Always.
I know when we've had our state of the market information nights and we get feedback from those that attend, one of the comments from everyone is how interesting they find your presentation, because it's something they've never considered before as an investment. They don't really necessarily understand how it works and the income. So, we'll put your number up on the screen, and I know anyone that does want to speak to you about that.
Yeah, be happy to.
Certainly, you're welcome. So, look, that's sort of all my questions. Is there anything further that you wanted just to add or to summarise up before we finish up?
No, I think probably the one thing that's driving through my mind, and we're talking about local commercial, is that support your local trader.
Yep.
Really, there's signs up everywhere. That's what the Yarra Ranges, City of Maroondah particularly, be kind to your local trader and support them. And I think over the next 6 to 12 months, there's a lot of capital activity with level crossing removals and all that sort of thing going on.
Yep.
Really support your local trader. That'd be great.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. It's the lifeblood of our towns, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And it's so easy these days, and I think that was probably one thing with lockdown that people perhaps got more accustomed to ordering things online. But gee, if you can come into your main streets of your Mooroolbark, Lilydales, Croydon, anywhere locally, and support the coffee shop and support the fruit shop and all of the businesses.
If you don't support them, they won't be here.
That's right.
Yeah, that's right. And you'll often hear people say things like, "Why haven't we got a fruit shop?" Well, that's because people stopped using it.
Yes.
So use it.
Yep. Spot on.
Yeah.
Russ, you're always a wise man. I appreciate your. I know you'll laugh with that, but you're always very wise when it comes to commercial industrial. You've got a wealth of knowledge in this outer east, and it's great to have you on Real Estate Pro Talk.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining me.
Good on you, Greg.
Thank you.
See ya.